Welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. This is a show that helps pastors think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. My name is John Sanders. I'm one of the co-hosts of the show, and we're so grateful to have you joining us for another episode. This is actually episode number 41, and the title of today's episode is More Than a Pastor. And in a moment, you're going to be hearing from our guest. His name is Rich Avery, and Rich has served for more than 20 years as a pastor. But also, all along his pastoral journey, he has felt drawn to and has been involved in different seasons in entrepreneurial pursuits in addition to pastoring. And now he runs a platform that he recently launched called More Than a Pastor, where he helps other pastors just like himself who deep down really feel like they're being called to more than just being a pastor. And so he's got a business where he's creating content and coaching around that and helping pastors really in a very similar way to what we're doing here with our EntrePastors platform. So Rich is a friend of our show. He's a friend of our community. And we're so grateful to get to highlight him and share the work that he's doing on this episode. So without any further ado, let's get to this interview that Les and I did recently with Rich Avery of More Than a Pastor. Check this out. Well, Rich Avery, welcome to the EntrePastors podcast, man. Great to see you today.
Thanks, John. Great to be here with you and Les, and really been blessed to get to know you guys over the last year or so, and really glad to be on the show with you today. So thanks so much.
You bet. Yeah, right before we hit record, we were just all complaining that the last time we were together, the three of us, we were in a much nicer setting. We were sitting in a nice restaurant on the Gulf of Mexico watching the sun go down. And you participated in the very first EntrePastors live event that we did. And we got to connect there. So great to catch up with you again and unpack your story here a little bit. So why don't we just start with a basic introduction for those who don't know who Rich Avery is. Give us a little bit of a background into your life and how, you've been involved in pastoral ministry over the years.
Sure. Thanks. Well, I've been a pastor for over 20 years, and most of that has been in a large, mega church setting in the same church. And I worked in the same church twice. And so that's a unique part of my story. A lot of times when someone is on staff at a church, they go away to something else. They don't come back. There's no coming back to the same church you were at. Not sure why that is, but that's you hardly hear that. And I was blessed to be able to come back on the staff and serve in another capacity as well. So 20 years basically in the same church. I also served our denomination. In the meantime, that's why I left for 5 years to serve in a small denominational leadership type role in a multi-ethnic ministry. And so that was really cool. But I began in ministry in my late 20s. And the first thing I was doing was visitation pastor, part-time, and then kind of grew that into what we call the care ministry. So anything caring for the congregation or caring for the community, those were some of the things I got involved in. Didn't really have preaching responsibilities except for funerals. And so I honed a lot of skills there. People were dying to meet me and hear me speak. Problem was there was always a dead body in the room every time I spoke, and that was a little awkward, but we made it work, and but anyway, it grew from the care ministry into local outreach and then global outreach, and then eventually serving in the denomination for a few years. And then I came back to the church in 2013 to be our first campus pastor. We were beginning a multi-site strategy locally and globally. And so I jumped in, was selected to come back and help us launch our first local campus. And I was a campus pastor there for 2 years. The Lord blessed us with a building, and I was responsible to help do renovations and get it all ready for the launch. And we had a couple of month time frame to make it happen. So I've got large church experience, but I also have small campus experience with a campus that was maybe around 300 people, at our height. And did that for a couple of years, and then went back into the global outreach role after a few years. Really, my passion has been mentoring, coaching leaders, especially overseas. And so I love to travel. And so the variety of being a missions pastor and traveling 8 to 10 weeks a year, it's always been a pull for me. That's how God has wired me. So I did that until this past October. And then I just left the church this past end of October or early November, and trying to launch into my passion, which is similar to what you guys are doing, helping pastors who maybe feel a call to also be an entrepreneur, and how to create their own side hustle or business so they can serve God and provide for their family no matter what happens.
Yeah, so why don't we dive right into that? Because the name of your platform is More Than a Pastor, and it absolutely resonates with our message here at EntrePastors. We're kind of smoking some of the same stuff together. More
Can
than a
you say
pastor.
that on this show?
I think so. I think so.
We did.
So tell us a little bit, Rich. What is More Than a Pastor? Start unpacking that for us. What do you mean by that, and specifically, how are you trying to help pastors through your platform and through your message?
Sure. Well, I'll go back to the beginning, early on in ministry, in my mid to late 20s. As wonderful as being called to a pastor was, and I knew I had been called to be a pastor, and that was affirmed through my ministerial training and through my ordination in 2005. So I began as a pastor in 1999 and then was ordained in 2005. So was confirmed all along, and I knew God had called me to be a pastor. And as great as that calling was, and I knew I was doing what God had called me to do, I always felt like I was called to something more. And I struggled with how to rectify that or remedy that. And now I'll talk to some in our leadership about that. Like I'm always reading business magazines, and I'm thriving on these stories of these entrepreneurs who are starting things and growing businesses and solving huge, social issues or problems for people with those businesses. And so I always felt that pull. And then I struggled with some time because my only vision, like I knew there were bivocational pastors who worked in the marketplace and in the church, but the ones I know, I know this is a generality, but the ones I knew, that was a stepping stone. Like they wanted to be full-time in the church. I know not everyone is that way, but they had to be bivocational. They had to work a job, but they wanted to be full-time in the church. Those were the ones I knew. And then in some of my ministerial training, there was a pastor who said, or a professor, he said, if you can ever see yourself doing something else other than the gospel ministry, you should go do that and not be a pastor. And then our church had the expectation, like if you're full-time, this is your thing. You're not like doing anything else outside of this. We had that kind of baked into our policies and procedures. And so I assumed I had to choose one over the other. Like I felt this call clearly to be a pastor. I kind of felt this tug to be an entrepreneur also. And I thought I had to choose one over the other, that one was greater than the other. And then one day I really felt a great peace. I was wrestling with God for a long time, praying about it. The church struggled over it. They were wondering, okay, Rich is having a hard time deciding, should we decide for him? Maybe does he just need to submit more to the Lord? Is this an issue where he's giving into worldly pleasures of wanting to do something else? So they didn't know what to do with me. And then at some point I just felt great peace. I felt the Lord saying to me one day, why are you thinking I'm asking you to choose one over the other? I've wired you to be both. I've called you to be both. And so walk into that, pursue that, and be okay with that. So you might not fit the categories that others expect, but be okay with that for you. And then that led me on a journey to begin different side hustles or different side businesses, really because I wanted to provide more income for my family. I mean, there was the interest or passion that I felt drawn toward business and entrepreneurship, but then there was the practical reality of we had 5 small kids and a salary that was okay as a pastor, but most of the other pastors on our staff, most of the employees on our staff, again, megachurch, they were dual income households. But I had a stay-at-home wife, 5 kids. My wife wanted to homeschool our kids. So if there was going to be a dual income, I was going to be doing both incomes, not her. And so that led us on a journey of pursuing different things and trying to live off that calling, a co-vocational calling or a multi-vocational calling of being a pastor and an entrepreneur or side hustler or gig person, whatever you might want to call it.
Yeah, I love that tension you've tapped into there, because it's a tension I've walked and felt in many ways in my life. Like like you said, there's those pastors that are bivocational that almost feel like it's out of, like, I have to do this. They don't really love the fact it's almost like a penalty box, that I'm trying to get out of as quick as I can.
Yep.
But you're in the other boat. Like, you're in this category of pastors. It's like, no, actually, I kind of like the idea of doing both. To your point, I wanted to ask you about this. To your point about, because I've heard that too, where we say, and kind of the common church wisdom, if you have a desire to do anything else, you should go do that and not be a pastor. I mean, that sounds kind of spiritual, I suppose, but I don't know that that's good advice. Like, what if God doesn't let you? What if God says, no, I want you to be a pastor, but I've also given you this passion for the business world? Like, for two questions. One, did you wrestle with guilt about that? Like, somehow what's wrong with me? So I'll let you speak to that. And then my second question is, and did you come to a place where you realized, like, maybe this is a dichotomy that is man-made that God hasn't actually put us in? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but how did that go for you?
Yes and yes. I would say it was a long time of wrestling and talking to other pastors and other trusted friends. But the more I kept talking and the more I kept praying about it, the more God seemed to not take this desire away from me. Some wondered, okay, is this your thorn in the flesh? Do you just need to lay this down and just be sanctified? And, there was a little bit of that at first, but because it stuck around and because I wasn't shirking my responsibilities in the church and because I felt like I can live out both, the church eventually began to realize, okay, let's back off. Let's give Rich some space and let's see if the Lord's in this and if he's going to bless this. And so I really give them a lot of credit for that, to love me through the challenges, to help me to, because at one point I heard our executive pastor had said that they were starting to talk about, if I can't decide, should they decide for me, meaning let me go so that I can pursue this entrepreneurial thing. But to their credit, they said, no, let's wait. Let's just trust God in this as Rich wrestles. And what's funny to me is that today, the very thing I struggled with is celebrated. Church planters, missional multipliers, they're encouraged to be entrepreneurs. If you go to the exponential or some multiplication conference, a lot of the workshops are on bivocational, co-vocational, entrepreneurial sorts of ministry. Some of the colleges and seminaries today now are beginning to teach how to be a pastor and be co-vocational, also be in the marketplace to provide for your family. So what's funny to me and what's amazing to me is that the very thing I wrestled with for so long is now being celebrated, now being touted. And I think it's now the future of the church. And so the Lord brought me through that ringer for a while to try to figure it out. But I think it's going to become more mainstream, more than people realize. And so I think those old models or those old labels we've had in the past of what a full-time pastor is or what's bivocational or what's co-vocational, I think those are going away. And I don't know. I've been a big fan of an architect, Frank Lloyd Wright. He was a pioneer 100 years ago with some of the homes he designed. And what I loved about him was that he created all new categories. He broke the labels. He did things that no one else did before. He broke the rules of how architecture is supposed to be. And he totally said, I'm creating my own. And now that is totally celebrated today. But at that time, people are like, you don't do things that way. Yeah. And so I think what Jon and Les are doing, you guys, what I'm doing, what some others are doing now, I think, is to help break down those barriers, tear down those labels, and help create a whole new category for pastors today and churches.
It's good to hear you say that. There really are no monuments that I know of for people who just were average and did it like everybody else. And even, I'm glad you weighed in on the saying that I've heard many times early in my ministry. I mean, it might have come out of my mouth, but I don't think so. And that is that if you can do anything else, go ahead and do it, because that creates that, that mindset that there's only one thing. And that's not a biblical model. Not in the life of the Apostle Paul or Jesus or the Old Testament prophets, who were all spokespeople for God, but that did other things, even for their livelihood. And you mentioned that model is coming quickly. I mean, it's already here, and it's a model that's been prevalent in most of the world except for the last 250 years or so, in arguably, in our own country. And so that is here. And it's really good to hear you say that. I would like for you to go through some of your journey, if you would, Rich, because some people might see this as a straight line. You start here and here's your goal and just put your head down and go for it. It's not a straight line, as you know. It's more serpentine. It's got its twists and its turns and corners you can't quite see around, and mountains and valleys. So if you would just take us on your journey, because I'm certain that what your business and life look like now isn't maybe how you foresaw it precisely, or how it started out a few years ago. And when did you, I guess, in your mind, sort of officially say, okay, there's a significant part of my life that's going to be invested in this entrepreneurial world?
Yeah, it was pretty much that first or second year of ministry, so almost 20 years ago, where I kind of committed, and then we began to launch into looking at different ways to create streams of income for our family. One of the best things I did was to get involved in some real estate in a small way. I knew some people who had a rental property, and there was a dear older man in our church who had a number of properties, and he, I think, had inherited some from his father. And so he had grown up and he had been an electrician. So he was someone that knew how to do a lot of the work. I didn't really know anything about how to fix houses or anything. So I sat down with him one day over breakfast and just said, Henry, can you tell me what I need to know about rental property or real estate? Because I think that might be a part of our future. And so he was really generous to spend some time with me, telling me all about it and his experience and how he went from again, I think he inherited a few or bought a few from his dad, but he went from a few and multiplied those over time. And then he said at the end of the conversation, and I've got a house I can sell you if you're interested, and we can do it on land contract, awesome. And it can be easy terms, and you can kind of get your feet wet. And it ended up being almost exactly a mile from our house. And so it didn't have to be so far away for me to get to if the toilet overflowed or something needed to be looked at, or the tenant got locked out. So we've had a lot of ups and downs with that. Overall, it's been a huge blessing for us. And I'd like to do more with that, with rental property. My wife has said that maybe I'm not the best personality for it because I'm a softie, because I'm the care pastor, Yeah. And so when people are late, when people are a month behind or 2 months behind, or that's been hard at times. I have taken people to court. I have evicted people, but it's been hard at times because I want to be compassionate. I want to be able to help people. But anyway, that has actually just been a huge blessing over these 20 years. And we just sold that first house that we bought. We just sold to the lady who's lived there the last 10 years. When she moved in, she said, I never want to leave this place. I love this place. And so would you ever sell it to me? And I said, well, maybe that would be a cool idea if we could sell it to a tenant someday. And then she kept asking, every couple of years. And then almost 3 years ago now, we decided to go ahead and sell it to her on land contract. And that's been a blessing for her and for us. So now I wish.
Can I get you to pardon me for interrupting you, but I want to push pause there for 1 second because of what you just said about Henry.
Yeah,
because I think there are a lot of people out there who really could use a Henry just to get them going, to coach them, to sort of be their guide. They've been to the mountain. They know what it looks like. And what was it about him where there are a lot of people you maybe could have asked, what was it about him? What were the qualities, or what was that relationship like? Or what was it about him that you felt like that was safe? Because I think there are a lot of people listening to us that don't think a conversation like that would be a safe one, or a question like that would be a safe one.
Yeah, that's a good point. Henry was someone who just radiated the love of Christ. He was very outgoing in sharing Christ with others. In fact, he would come sometimes and help me work on the house. And as we were outdoors fixing the porch or different things, he'd be telling everyone about Christ who walked by. It was in an inner city neighborhood. And so I learned so much from him, and he was involved in doing hospital visitations. So I had known him before because he was serving in my ministry area. but he was just someone who had a heart. Man, the biggest thing I think I learned from him, he always looked at his investment of time or money, if he would give to people, is planting seeds. And so even as people walked by us and someone might say I needed help or something, or even if they didn't, he would reach in his pocket. He already had like a $20 bill folded up or something and just would give it to bless people. Or sometimes he would give me something or say, my wife said I got to buy breakfast this time. You know, he always bought breakfast every time. But whatever he did to give, and whether it was sharing time or money or helps, he saw it as an investment, that he was planting seeds in you and planting seeds in God's kingdom. And he knew that was going to come back to him in some way, not that he was looking for that, but he knew the more he invested and planted in the kingdom, the more it was going to benefit everyone, including himself. So that was one thing that stuck with me all these years. And it's been a huge, huge blessing.
Good. Rich, so what is your business model? Let's talk about that briefly, if you don't mind. So now you're building this More Than a Pastor, and are you still in real estate? Do you have other streams of revenue that you're building out as well? And then I'd love to hear more about like the business model behind More Than a Pastor.
Yeah, we don't have any more at this time. We did some years back buy and then sell a few years later a duplex. And I wish I would have kept that longer, but at the time, that was just before the 2008 market crash and stuff, when we had bought it maybe in 2005 and then sold it like 2007, I think, something like that. I don't know. We had it for a couple of years, but I wanted to expand, wanted to grow in that because I really wanted to create passive income. That was my dream. And that's what Henry had suggested to me. He said, when you're working your regular job, you're exchanging hours for dollars or you get a salary. But what are you doing to create passive income where you can make money while you sleep, where you've got recurring income that comes in? You do something once and that comes in over and over. So that had been my goal, to create more things, to generate more money that I could put into passive and recurring things. So I did a lot of crazy things back in the day, different side hustles and things I had tried. One, I'll just tell you this one real quick before I talk about what I'm doing right now. But craziest thing, the dumbest thing I ever did was to create a kettle corn business to go to events and festivals and stuff to sell kettle corn. Now, I love kettle corn. I bought some today at a farmer's market. If you are selling kettle corn, I'm going to buy it from you. So I'm not saying it's not a good business for you, but I realized for me, all these events I'm going to are on like Saturdays and Sundays. And so if I'm a pastor, that's not really a good model to have something that's happening on Sundays. And not that I was preaching and had to be at the church every Sunday, but there was the expectation that you're there, you're present, you're ministering with people and stuff. And so I did that for a couple of years, to the consternation of my church leadership, because I was always asking for different weekends off to do these events and stuff. But I realized, okay, for me, I didn't want to do like labor intensive stuff that was dependent upon the weather, stuff where I had to be there, and stuff that happened on the Sundays when I was expected to be at church and stuff. So that led me on, okay, how can I use my mind? How can I use my brain? How can I use the skills God's already given me? And I began to think about, how can I leverage the skills I have in ministry? Because as pastors, as you guys have talked about on your podcast in the past, and like listening to Kent Sanders here a week or two ago, writing is a big thing that we pastors do, or studying or speaking. And so I began to think, how can I leverage those things? How can I create resources or things that are intellectual property or content versus manual labor sorts of stuff. So then I began to look at copywriting. I had 10 years in radio, so learned about copywriting and that kind of stuff through that, or like audio production. So I did some audio production work, voiceover type work. So began to look at those sorts of things that I could do that were skills I already had, passions that I already had interest in, and then those were already assets that I could put into work right away versus trying to create something from scratch that I didn't know. So my wife jokes that the More Than a Pastor is like my side gig to help pastors have side gigs, or my side hustle to help pastors find side hustles, because I've just felt more and more that there are a lot of other pastors like me who wanted to create something on the side to provide more for their family, or they just felt like they had more to give. They wanted to do more. As great as ministry was and is, no one job or career fully taps into who we are as people, our passions and interests, or our skills and talents. And so how can I help other pastors like me that had those same struggles or they were wrestling with? How can I create more for my family? How can I make a bigger impact using my gifts and talents? And so then I just began to look at, okay, how can I build a platform then that can help other pastors, create their platform or launch into leveraging their skills they developed in ministry into the marketplace in some way that can provide more for their family. I wish I could say today that everything is roses and I've got 6 figures coming in, and it's been amazing in the last 6 or 7 months since I've left the church, but there's a lot of ups and downs, and I know it's going to be a long-term process. I've had a lot of struggles in the past because I make great progress and strides in one area, and then kind of it's like 1 step forward, 2 steps back, or that kind of thing, back and forth, stopping, starting, sometimes not believing in myself. There's that imposter syndrome that people talk about where you think you're not good enough. And Gay Hendricks talks about it in his book, The Big Leap, which really made a huge impact on me. All of us have a lid that we place on ourselves, and we think we're not worthy of any more income beyond that lid or any success beyond that lid. And so I've wrestled with that quite a bit, as well as I've been trying to launch this business and create some resources to help other pastors. So I'm no expert. I haven't gotten it all figured out, but brother or sister, I may be 1 step ahead of you in thinking through some things, and I want to just walk alongside people and help them wrestle and try to figure out how to leverage their ministry skills and know-how into extra income outside their church. And so that's what I'm trying to work on and figure out right now.
Well, I love that. And when you and I and Les sat down in Florida back in, what was it, October of last year, one of the things you mentioned to us, and I'm just going to be very transparent with our audience, you mentioned like, well, maybe this might be a little awkward, Jon and Les, because I'm wanting to do some of the same stuff you guys are doing. Like I want to be in the same space. And I just want to say and model for anyone else listening, like, part of having an abundant mindset is there is plenty of room in the pool for all of us. A scarcity, poverty mindset says, man, if Rich gets in the pool with us, then that's somehow less space for the rest of us, or he's taking something from us instead of recognizing, man, there is more than enough to go around. And so truly, we wish you nothing but the best as you build out your business, and we hope you help and serve many, many pastors as well, because we believe in the vision that you're doing. Tell us a little bit about your podcast, and then I want to transition into some of the content that you've been producing there recently, because it was, when I was listening to that, I was like, man, this would be a good conversation to have with Rich on the show. So tell people where they can find your podcast, and then I'm going to hit you with some questions about that.
Yeah, sure. You can find me at morethanapastor.com. And I've got, I think, maybe almost 20 episodes up right now. I began the podcast 2 years ago, did 10 episodes, and then took a hiatus for like a year. Again, because of letting some of those obstacles get in my way and rethinking, overthinking things. And then in the last couple months here, I've got almost, I think, 9 or 10 more episodes up. So since February of this year, I've been more active in getting it going. So, my passion with that, eventually, right now, it's all been myself talking and sharing things from my heart. But I do want to do interviews like what you guys are doing here, and really share stories of other pastors who are using their gifts, their talents, leveraging their ministry skills into the marketplace in some way through their own business. I know a couple of pastors who are now Chick-fil-A owners. Want to interview those guys, like how'd that happen? But I began thinking at first, I just want to help anyone that's struggling, that maybe feels called to something more. But then through going to EntrePastors and hearing Dan Miller and other people talk, we need to niche down more and really focus in more. So I thought, okay, I really want to focus in on pastors that maybe are feeling called to entrepreneurship or wondering if that's right for them, how to figure that out, and then how to create income streams outside of the church. So that's kind of where I'm honing my message now with the podcast, and I've begun some YouTube videos as well. So, and I've just been starting now to write a book on like side hustle ideas for pastors. I'm looking forward to hopefully this summer being able to publish that. So, but again, morethanapastor.com, that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Well, recently you've been doing well, I say recently at the time of this
Mhm.
recording, you've been doing a series about, and I'll let you put it in your own words, but it's really kind of, you're making a case for why this newish to us model is going to become more and more necessary in the future. And you're not really even talking about jobs or money. You're talking about what's happening in the landscape of our culture that is having a direct effect on the church. And so, I mean, without asking you to say everything you've said on all those past episodes, can you kind of unpack maybe just some of the highlights? What do you see, Rich, when you look out into the culture? What's going on that pastors, if they're not aware of this, or if they're, kind of have their head in the sand, they need to really get their finger on the pulse of some of these things that you see in order to be prepared for some of these massive changes that are coming our way. What would you say to that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Well, it was a message I felt the Lord had given me maybe about a year ago, but I was a little too shy to speak about it, and that's why there was such a long pause with my podcast. It was like if you've had a sermon, the Lord gave you a message, you put on your heart to share with the congregation, but you don't want to do it, and you've got your reasons why they're not ready, or you're not sure you want to say it, or you're not living it out yourself, or whatever it might be, and so we hesitate or we delay or whatever. And so I kind of felt like this message was that was what I did with this message, that the Lord put it on my heart, but I wasn't sure that I should share it or whatever. And I just began to think about some of the trends happening in our culture. And maybe it began a couple of years ago. The week or two before the shutdown in 2020, in March of 2020, I went to the Exponential Church Multiplication Conference in Orlando. And I went to all the workshops that were on bivocational or co-vocational ministry. There were like 7 or 8 of them. And all the pastors that were leading these workshops were talking about some of these cultural trends that I maybe had thought about on the periphery, but wasn't quite aware of. But they talked about just how millennials and Gen Z, the younger generations are becoming allergic to church or certain aspects of church. And that's kind of how I would categorize or describe what they were talking about, that there were certain things happening culturally, politically. And so, and I've discovered that just with my own kids. We have 5 kids, ages 15 to 25. So we definitely have some of they're all the younger generation there. And when you look at just politically, like with Donald Trump's presidency, I've said this, I don't know how many times on my podcast, I'm not trying to be political or start political arguments, but the younger generations look at some of the ways he spoke about people, or some of the ways he acted or whatever, and they say, why are moral Christian people supporting that? And again, I'm not making a judgment myself or saying why you should or shouldn't, but they looked at how we treated like Bill Clinton, a generation or two before, when there was the issue with Monica Lewinsky, and the Christian leadership was all over that. He's not fit to be president because of that. And then you hear about the allegations with Trump. So I don't say that you should vote one way or the other, but I'm saying that they're looking at that, and that's one thing that the younger generation are like, I'm not sure, is the church leading with morality on this issue, or are they talking out of both sides of their mouth? I'll talk about like Me Too, or even Church Too now, or like some of the toxic leadership in the church these days. A lot of younger people are looking at the stories that come out almost every week, or at least every month now, of pastors who are abusing their pulpit and sexually abusing women in the church, or in some of the ways they just treated their staff, with disrespect and things like that. And so that is just coming out more and more every day. And so the people, when the culture sees that, they think, well, every church must be that way. And it's not. And hopefully we're not, those listening to this, but the culture paints with a broad brush and says, okay, that's what the church is like these days. Or you might look at like how women preachers are disrespected sometimes, like Beth Moore told to go home, or things like that. So they look at, okay, is the church caring for women, or like the racism or LGBTQ, some of those issues? So I'm just kind of sharing some of the things. These are all things, if you want to hear more, you can hear my podcast. But I'm looking at those issues and seeing that the younger generations are just not sure, is the church backing up, what it says it wants to do with its actions? Are they caring for the most vulnerable people in society? And so I think a generation ago, pastors and churches would get a pass on that. Like they would say, okay, well, I know my church isn't that way, or I know this church over here that I maybe would go to isn't that way. But I think more and more in our culture, people are thinking, man, every church is that way. And so they're just kind of writing off, or they're allergic to the church altogether. And so those are some of the things that I've been picking up on. And so this was before COVID, when I went out of these workshops. And one of the speakers, Mark Demaz, he talked about the fact that many churches are going to struggle to survive on tithes and offerings going forward, because you look at this huge generational gap from millennials and younger not engaging in church like their parents. I'm a Gen Xer, so like my generation and those before me. And so just looking at that, if we're losing some generations, then churches are not going to be able to survive on tithes and offerings. They're going to have to look at other ways to create income for the church. And then I began to think, well, and that means pastors may have to look for other ways to provide more for their family, because there may come a day when the church says, I'm sorry, pastor, I know you've been full-time all your career and all this ministry, but we've had so many people, we've lost so many people, the income has been down, we're going to have to cut back. And then add COVID a couple of weeks later, after I began, realizing some of these things, every church was shut down. At least in our state of Michigan, we had some of the harshest lockdowns that didn't seem to ever end. And every church was having to pivot and try to figure out how to engage outside the building, outside the main worship service, through online or whatever. And now, we had a year of, okay, COVID, now it's going to be getting better this fall. And then the next year, okay, maybe it'll get better this winter. And now it's the third year. And so I think for a long time, pastors and churches have been waiting. Okay, it'll get better soon. Okay, this will almost be over, this next month, or by Christmas or Easter, whatever. And now I'm saying, okay, it's time to define reality. If you're still waiting and hoping that the people are coming back and the numbers are going to improve, maybe it's time to define reality. That's what every leader should do, and say, who we got is who we got. And let's pivot, let's make some changes to survive. And so I think there's some great things that churches can do to create other revenue streams through their building and their property and the assets they have. And I think there's things pastors can do to create income streams to the assets that God has given them as well. So sorry, I probably talked too long on that.
Oh, that's really good, man. And you did a great job in your podcast of just unpacking that. Like, we're living in some transformational times, I believe, in the church. And it's not all gloom and doom and negative. Like, I don't think Jesus is in heaven freaking out about the future of his church.
Correct.
But I do think here on earth, there's some fundamental things that are going to be very different in the church moving forward. And it's a complex issue. It's not just if we get the right guy elected, it's all fixed. No, man, it's complex. There's so many things affecting it. But the reality is, for most pastors, it's going to have an effect on, if you will, the business model. And up to this point, largely the church has had one business model. It's, we have our hands out. We're relying on God's people to obey scripture and give to the Lord through their local church. And that's a great plan. But when less people are coming, and the ones that are coming aren't really obeying that command to give, like, it's soon going to be putting pastors in an interesting position where it's like, well, the funding's got to come from somewhere. And so, again, I think it all points to that, empowering pastors to be out in the marketplace. There's a lot of ministry that happens out in the marketplace too, by the way. So I think that's another exciting thing that needs to be mentioned. But anyway, man, there's so much good stuff here, Rich, that we could keep going on. But I'm going to direct our audience. If you want more of what you're hearing Rich share there, just go check out his podcast, subscribe to his podcast. Rich, I'm going to invite you to stick around and join us backstage. And I'd like to go a little bit deeper into some of those roadblocks you were talking about earlier. Just, if you don't mind, peeling back the layers and being transparent about your specific EntrePastor journey, or we'll call it more than a pastor journey in keeping with your branding. But, you're that, because I promise your struggle, Rich, is not, you're not alone in that. And when you share, I think it's going to resonate with a lot of other leaders out there that are going to be listening to this, saying, man, me too. Like, I'm struggling with that. Like, I'm all of the stuff. So I'd like to unpack that a little further. If you're willing to do that, is that something you'd be willing to share and go deeper into?
Sure, you bet. Be glad to.
Fantastic. Les, you got anything else before we sign off on this part of the podcast?
No, I love your message. I mean, you know that. We appreciate you, and we're thankful that you have been speaking the things that from real-time experience, into people that are taking the same journey as we are. So we appreciate you speaking into that.
Awesome. I appreciate you guys and the EntrePastors message. When I heard you guys were hosting that very first event last year in Florida, I just knew I had to be there and be a part of it, to meet you guys personally. And then the lineup you had of the speakers, I've become friends, had some connections now with some of the speakers there at that event. And that's really meant a lot to me. And so it's been really cool. It's been catalytic for me. And so as you are hosting others, I hope to be able to be at others in the future and meet more of the other people in your community. I'm glad to be a part of your community as well, to be learning along with what you guys are putting out and sharing. And so I encourage others to dig into the EntrePastors community.
Well, hey, thanks for watching this episode of the EntrePastors podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can be notified every time we release a new episode. If you'd like to get connected to other pastors who are learning to think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs, then we invite you to check us out on Facebook. Just search for the EntrePastors Connect group. Answer a few of our simple questions there, and we'd love to include you in the conversations. And if you're really ready to go to the next level, then we invite you to join our EntrePastors membership community. When you become a monthly subscriber, you will receive access to courses, exclusive community, and coaching that will help you along in your own EntrePastors journey. If there's anything else we can do to serve you, please visit us at EntrePastors.com, and we will do our best to serve you there. God bless everybody. See you soon.